The quiet librarian. In the heart of a fading New England town stood a modest stone library, weathered by decades but lovingly preserved by one woman, Eleanor Thatcher. At 67, she moved like time itself, unhurried, precise, and deliberate. Her silver hair was always pinned in a neat bun, and her daily attire rarely strayed from soft cardigans and wool skirts. For the townsfolk, Eleanor was more than a librarian. She was a relic, as permanent as the marble lion outside the library's entrance. Children adored her story hours, enchanted by her soothing voice and the way she made fairy tales feel like ancient truths. But adults, especially the older ones, spoke of her in hushed tones. No one knew where she came from before the library, only that she'd arrived one rainy spring morning nearly 4 decades ago and never left. No family ever visited. No photographs adorned her desk. Her home, a creaky Victorian near the woods, was just as silent and secretive as she was. To most, Eleanor's life appeared peaceful, perhaps lonely, but peacefully chosen. Yet beneath her composed exterior, a grief long buried whispered in quiet hours. She often lingered in the archives room, staring at a locked drawer. She never spoke of its contents, and no one dared to ask. Then came Clara, a 22-year-old literature graduate volunteering at the library for the summer. Vibrant and curious, Clara found Eleanor intriguing rather than intimidating. Where others saw coldness, she noticed sadness. Where they saw solitude, she sensed restraint. One rainy afternoon, Clara stayed late cataloging books in the basement archives. She heard soft weeping from the corner of the room. Turning the corner quietly, she saw Eleanor seated on a wooden stool, back hunched, holding a photograph in trembling hands. Her lips moved, but Clara couldn't make out the words. A black and white image of a young man in uniform sat cradled in her palms. Startled by Clara's presence, Eleanor wiped her tears hastily. "It's nothing, dear," she said, voice cracking, retreating into composure. "Just the dust in this place." But Clara had seen enough to know this wasn't dust-induced sorrow. That moment shattered the wall between them. Eleanor's past, once tightly guarded, had finally cracked. Later that evening, after the library had closed and rain continued to patter against the stained glass windows, Clara passed by the archive room once more. The door was slightly ajar. On the desk inside lay the same photograph, and beneath it, an envelope sealed in yellowed wax. Scrawled across it in fading ink, "To Eleanor, if he never returns." And for the first time, Clara understood, Eleanor Thatcher was not just a librarian with a quiet life. The forgotten letter. Clara returned the next morning with the letter in her coat pocket, her fingers brushing against the brittle envelope as though it might dissolve at her touch. She hadn't opened it. Not yet. Something about it felt sacred, like disturbing a grave. The library was quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock and the rustle of newspapers in the reading corner. Eleanor sat at her usual desk, cataloging returns with methodical grace. Her eyes lifted as Clara approached, alert but unreadable. "I found this," Clara said, placing the envelope gently on the desk. It was under a loose board behind the history shelf. Eleanor stared at the wax seal. Her breath caught. For a moment, time fractured. With trembling hands, she lifted the letter. The seal cracked like dry bark. Inside, the pages were yellowed, the ink slightly smudged, but the words were intact. As Eleanor read, the silence thickened around her. "My dearest Eleanor, if this reaches you, it means I've survived, though not unchanged." Her lips parted, barely breathing the words. The letter was from Samuel Alden, the man in the photograph. Her fiancé, a soldier lost in the Falklands War, officially declared missing, presumed dead, but he hadn't died. Samuel had been injured, left with partial amnesia, and transported to a military hospital in Argentina. By the time he regained his memory, years had passed, and he'd sent this letter not knowing if she still waited. He'd written of dreams where she waited by a lamppost, always out of reach. But the letter had never been delivered. "I waited for him," Eleanor whispered. "For years. I wrote him every month. Never a reply. I thought, I thought he chose to forget me. Clara knelt beside her. He didn't. This was lost. Until now. Eleanor closed her eyes. Do you understand what that means? All these years I thought he abandoned me. And he thought the same. A silence passed between them, heavy with sorrow and revelation. Clara's voice, gentle but resolute, broke it. Then let's find out what happened to him. Really, where he went. What became of his life? Eleanor shook her head at first, too stunned, too tired. But something in Clara's eyes reminded her of herself. Young, defiant, unwilling to accept silence as an answer. There's a return address, Clara added, tapping the corner of the envelope. It's old, but it's something. Eleanor looked down at the envelope, then at the faded photograph she kept in her pocketbook. Her fingers brushed the face of the man she once loved, the man who never forgot her, even if the world had conspired to keep them apart. A trip to the past. 2 weeks later, Clara and Eleanor stepped off a quiet train in Rockwell, a small coastal town where the return address had led them. The station was faded, like a memory clinging to the present, its benches sun-bleached and quiet. Eleanor held her purse tightly in her lap, her nerves barely masked beneath her calm demeanor. I don't know what we'll find, she murmured, watching the sea in the distance. But something inside me feels ready. Clara nodded. We're not here for what we hope, just for the truth. Their destination was a modest veterans care facility on the outskirts of town. There, in a quiet common room surrounded by shelves of war memoirs and forgotten medals, they met Thomas Whitmore, a retired Army medic with deep-set eyes and a voice like gravel. I remember Samuel Alden, he said, the moment Eleanor showed him the photograph. Everyone called him Sam. He came here in '84, damaged but kind. He had no family, no memory of his life before the war. But he carried a journal. Wouldn't let anyone touch it. Thomas walked them to a storage room where old residents' belongings were kept in labeled boxes. Dust hung thick in the air. He handed Eleanor a worn, leather-bound journal. Inside were page after page of sketches, faces, landscapes, even a particular bench under a tall lamp. And again, one name written carefully in different styles, Eleanor. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages. He remembered, she whispered. He didn't know who I was, but he remembered loving me. Clara gently placed her hand on Eleanor's shoulder. Thomas spoke again, voice low. He passed in 2010. Never married. We buried him just down the road, under the name given to him by the hospital. Samuel Gray. But he never stopped sketching that same woman. We always wondered who she was. Later that day, Eleanor and Clara stood by a small headstone shaded by willow trees. The inscription was simple. Samuel Gray, a quiet soul, loved by few, remembered by one. Eleanor knelt, pulling from her coat a letter she had written decades ago. One of many sent, never returned. She placed it beside the grave, pressing it gently into the earth. I loved you every day you were gone, she said softly. And now I know you were trying to come home. The wind picked up, stirring the leaves. As they walked away, Clara asked, Do you feel peace? Eleanor smiled faintly. Not peace yet, but clarity. And for the first time in years, I think I'm ready to live again. The legacy of love. Back in the quiet town Eleanor had called home for nearly half a century. Something imperceptible had shifted. The same path led her to the library each morning, but her footsteps were lighter now, no longer tethered by unanswered questions. Her eyes, once dulled by routine and solitude, held a subtle shimmer. The library, too, began to change. On Clara's suggestion, Eleanor cleared a shelf once filled with outdated encyclopedias and replaced it with a small sign in elegant cursive. Letters never sent. Beneath it, an antique wooden box, unlocked and open to the public, welcomed folded confessions, apologies, declarations, and goodbyes. At first, only a few notes appeared, anonymous and shy. But soon, the box filled weekly. Locals poured their hearts into those fragile pages. A widow wrote to her late husband. A young boy confessed to a father who had disappeared.